My name is Phia Bennin, and we're here doing a panel called Edit or Regret It. And I'm the senior producer at Reply All, and I'm up here with like 3 incredible radio magicians who take our sweat and tears and make it into beautiful art and stories. And I thought just to start, if each of you could introduce yourselves, say the show you work on, and I asked you beforehand if you could think of like one moment of a story that like you fought to keep a piece of tape in that you absolutely loved, or some little glimmer of tape that you think is just like makes you really happy. So maybe we can start with you.
Great. Hi, I'm Jenny Lawton. I work at WNYC Studios. I work on a variety of shows, including I worked on the 2nd season of More Perfect, Piece of Work, a bunch of other stuff, and Nancy, the LGBTQ podcast. Tobin and Kathy will be here tonight. Come see the show. And the piece of tape I picked out, so I kind of see my job as a fellow traveler puzzle solver, and also when the people that I'm working with have great ideas, I feel like it's my role to like yes and them and help enable them to kind of take it to the next level, hopefully. And so the clip that I chose is reporter Matt Collette was working on a story about Harry Potter, and J.K. Rowling, after the facts, tried to suggest that Dumbledore was gay and that he was gay all along, which is disputed by Harry Potter fans, including Matt. And we had to dramatize a segment of the book, this very obscure scene, and we were trying to decide, were we going to hire actors? Were we going to, it's not in the movies. And so Matt was like, if I could do this, I would do it with, if this was a video, I'd do this with sock puppets. And I said, So we went whole hog on that, and you should know that Matt is a really capable reporter and kind of leans news. So I felt like it was my job to take the other side of Matt that I saw around the office and to support him as he made this reenactment of a dramatic scene.
So can we play the Harry Potter clip?
Later, after Grindelwald has followed through on his super obvious evil plan.
Grindelwald, you need to stop being evil. I'll never stop. Then I guess we have to duel. Magic. Oh no, I am defeated. But before this duel ends, I shall cast one final spell. Magic.
You've killed my sister! No! I have defeated Grindelwald, but at a terrible cost.
So the piece of tape I fought for, among other things in there, is to keep Matt saying, magic, magic, because that was far better than anything else that we could have sound designed.
Wendy?
My name is Wendy Dorr, and I'm currently a narrative editor on The Daily, and I edited for the New York Times Caliphate, and then before that I was at Gimlet, and I was a senior producer and editor on Heavyweight. And then before that, a long, long time ago, I worked at This American Life when there were only 7 people on the show. Now it's much bigger. I brought a clip from the first season of Heavyweight. It's a piece of tape that when I was going through the raw tape, Jonathan wanted to do a story about meeting up with his very first girlfriend. And so he has this pretty serious talk with his wife about it, kind of asking permission, is it okay if I go and meet with her? And it's going to tell me a lot of things about myself. And when I was listening to the raw tape, I heard this little thing, and I immediately knew that it had to stay in. And Jonathan really fought me on it. He was like, no, I just sound like an idiot. And I was like, well, it kind of is a perfect little moment that shows his humanity and his humor in a pretty serious conversation. So you can play that clip.
In that, I don't think I've ever been able to make myself quite as vulnerable as I was in that relationship. I just didn't know any better I had no defenses, I had no game.
Isn't that what love is sort of about? Just being vulnerable in that way?
I want to be vulnerable with you, but I think in some ways... Sorry, I just dropped the recorder.
That really happened.
After we say our goodbye.
I guess it's my turn. I'm Emanuele Berry. So I edit The Nod, which is a show from Gimlet about Black culture, and I also edit Startup over at Gimlet. What clip did I bring? Yeah, the clip that I brought is from an oral history of Nuckavy Buck, which is a wonderful song. Everyone should listen to it. And it's a clip that every time I listen to it, it just brings me so much joy, in part because the reporter, Mac, his reaction in the clip, and also it's so ridiculous to me. But basically, this group of teenagers made this song, became really famous, signed a bad contract. And so this is a clip of Mac calling up their old manager on the phone and talking about a lawsuit. Go for it.
Summer 2002, I made the beat. And in my mind, I'm imagining
Actually,
that fucking
the
fight
clip-
that happened.
Sorry, it's labeled who? Okay, so in the meantime, I'll actually share. I brought one clip of my own, which is just not as an editor, but as a producer. I was working on this past week's episode of Reply All, and we had a security expert that we were interviewing, and we had in the story just a clip of Alex, the host, and this expert named Michael just doing a hi, how are you? And it just was a boring little moment, and we went back into the raw tape to say is there something more fun there? And I found this moment that is labeled, I think, Trail Mix. I don't know if we could play that. Maybe we're throwing...
So I got in touch with this guy named Michael Bizzell, who's actually a listener who wrote in at one point to offer his services because he's a cybersecurity expert. Getting a level on your voice, could you do me a favor and tell me what you had for breakfast?
I had nothing for breakfast because I gave a keynote and I never eat before a keynote.
Because of nerves?
No, I think it's just better on an empty stomach. I think I can speak clearer and I'm not holding back a burp.
I just choked on a little bit of trail mix I ate earlier, so...
So that just made me really happy to get to force that into the episode this week. I don't know if maybe we should wait on Emanuele's clip. It sounds like maybe we'll get to hear it. Oh, cool. Do you want to set any of it up again?
Sure. No, it's once again, this is the lawyer of, not the lawyer, this is the former manager of a group of kids who made them sign a bad contract when they were kids.
Hey, that shit got handled in court. And somebody won.
You.
Ooh.
You did.
Ooh.
And that's what I wanted to.
You know, you gotta think that that owl is a real thing, man. I'm just saying, somebody won.
I just love that clip because it's so ridiculous. And he just kept going and going and going. Could have listened to it for all day.
Yeah, me too. So before we jump into more of this, I was wondering if we could just get a show of hands. How many people are here because they think they might want to be an editor at some point? Okay, that's quite a few people. And how many people are here because they want to figure out how to work with an editor, how to communicate with an editor better? Okay, great, thank you. So just to start, particularly for the people who are interested in becoming an editor, could you guys give just a little bit of your origin story? How did you get here? Maybe Jenny, we could start with you.
Sure. I've been in radio and audio for about 15 years. I started off at WBEZ. Is anybody here from WBEZ? Yes. Okay. So I used to work at 848. I started off as a reporter and producer, but all along the way, I was editing contributors and realized early on that I wasn't. I could report and I could produce, but what I really like to do is edit and work with people and do that. So I was at Be Easy for about 5 years and then was at Studio 360 at WNYC for a decade, where I learned from fantastic editors, David Krasnow, Michelle Siegel, Litan Malad, and then got this opportunity to work with More Perfect and the studios team. And it was really exciting getting to learn different formats, and each show that I work on requires kind of a different approach, so that's been really exciting for me.
What did you like better about editing than contributing or reporting?
That's a good question. I don't love going out and getting tape. I get really anxious. I get really anxious going on like reporting trips or even just going to a press conference, because like I could get the best tape in the world or I could get the worst tape in the world, and I'd much rather have this stuff and then figure out what to do with it. And I love Pro Tools. I love that exercise of moving stuff around and playing with pacing. And so I find that safe and fun.
Totally. What about you, Wendy?
So I never intended to be an editor. I just became one because apparently I have very strong opinions about things I like and don't like, which is a good quality to have as an editor. But I became an editor just by doing a lot of stories and really having an opinion about what I liked and what I didn't like. And then and I'm still constantly learning. Like, you can have an opinion about something you don't like, but you also have to fix it or figure out a way to fix it. And I do really enjoy that process. I was edited by a lot of great people. When I worked at This American Life, every story that I ever worked on or produced other people's stories was edited by Ira, and he's such a great teacher, and I learned so much from him. And also from Alex Bloomberg, I learned so much, and so that's all. I just learned from a lot of people. I internalized a lot of their notes, and then I've just continued to have like strong opinions about things I like and don't like.
Do you feel like having made all that stuff is important for like being a good editor? Do you think you need to?
I think so, because you really have to understand the process, and if you know what it's like to be edited, it affects the way you edit other people. So you know what it feels like to have, slaved away and made a story and then have it be kind of like ripped apart by somebody. Feels pretty bad. So I'm very aware of that when I work with people that, yeah.
So you're like an empathetic editor.
I'm an empathetic editor. I try to be, yeah.
And Emanuele, how did you end up editing?
Yeah, so this is like a recent change for me. So I just became an editor this summer, which is like, I don't know, a couple months ago. No, early summer. But I worked as a producer and reporter for many years in public radio, and then I eventually landed at Gimlet, where I worked as a producer on like 3 or 4 different shows. And the shows that I edit now are shows that I used to work on as a producer, which I also think is helpful because I know those team members, I know how they work, I know how they function. And the transition, I mean, I don't know, it's an interesting thing because like there isn't like a set path or like way to necessarily like become an editor. Like I'm still figuring it out. I think part of it is just in doing. But I think some of the things that we've already said about like having strong opinions is very important. And also like having made stuff those are like some of the most helpful things, I think.
Do you miss things about your previous roles? Is there stuff you miss?
Yeah, I actually like going out and talking to people, so I do feel like I'm a little bit like shut in with people bringing stuff back. And yeah, you hear stuff and you're like, oh, I would have done this differently in the field. I think there's also value in like helping people like make their dream story come true, and like I really, really enjoy that part of the process too. So
cool. So all 3 of you probably get pitches all the time. Can you give me an example of like the kind of story that gets you really excited when you hear it as a pitch? Maybe Emanuele, we'll start with you.
Okay.
Go the other way.
So what gets me excited about a story is like how excited the person is about the story. I think like that does like a lot of the work for me. So for example, the clip that I just played from Nuck a Few Buck, that was brought to us by an intern on the Nod, and like it was a story that he like pitched with his internship, and he like was obsessed with it. Like he would talk about it all the time. He was like so excited about it. He's like, I'm gonna make this happen. I'm gonna make this happen. I'm gonna make this happen. And like that is one of the most exciting things for me as an editor to hear in a pitch is like how badly like you believe in this story, because it makes it so that even if it's not like the perfect story or it doesn't necessarily have all the elements, like I'm gonna help you figure this out, and that's like a really exciting pitch to me.
Cool. Yeah. What about you, Wendy?
I think I like stories. I like to hear stories that are just what? That really happened, or that there's some part of it that just doesn't make sense, or is asking a kind of a question that has never been asked before. Something that just makes me like really perk up is just anything where I don't know what the answer to the question is and I get engaged in that way. Because I think also sometimes people, when they pitch stories, they're so excited, and I also have to be honest about my own excitement, so I will ask further questions like, have you really thought this out, and have you thought about this? And it helps to keep it grounded, but it also has to be something really surprising to me. That's all.
Can you think of a story recently that made you go, what?
I mean, the whole caliphate story, the story of this guy who joined ISIS, that was, when I first heard the tape, I was, it just made no sense that there was a guy in Canada who had joined ISIS, and he was living in a basement, and he was willing to talk to a reporter about it. So that just made me so excited. And also the idea of going alongside Rukmini as she's doing her reporting seemed like nothing I'd ever heard before. So I'm always looking for stuff that has never been done or never been heard before.
Is there, I mean, and if nothing comes to mind, that's fine, but is there a smaller, like, it feels intimidating to have to come up with, like, caliphate. Is there, like, a smaller example of something that made you go, what?
Good one. So in a much smaller scale, so we just did this, so what I do on the daily is I work on stories that are not just day turnarounds, but are more like we have a week or two or a month. And we just did a little mini series about Democrats in Missouri, which could sound really boring, except the main character was a pro-life Democrat. And that hooked me right away. It's like, okay, what's her story? And she was a lifelong Democrat, an organizer in the party, and she talked about her struggle to be both pro-life and in the Democratic Party. And so that was the thing that hooked me in right away. So you just have to find those little. Sabrina Tabernisi told me that when she's looking for stories, she's this reporter who did the Missouri stories, that, looking for stories is like it's not like you're looking for $1 on the ground, you're looking for like a $20 bill on the ground all the time. And that's true, like these, to find really good stories, it's hard, and you're looking for these rare things, but they're out there, apparently.
Jenny, what kind of story gets you really excited? What sort of pitch do you love?
They said it really well. I think kind of what Wendy said about finding like there's a tension or a twist in it. You can find a really great source who's a really great talker, and it can be super sound rich, and that's all really exciting, and that takes you a lot of the way there, but there has to be like a dramatic action. There has to be something that makes it a story, not just a snapshot. So that to me is often really, really hard to find, but that's what makes it or doesn't.
Yeah, and also just like people struggling to figure something out, that if there's some of that in a story, that's always exciting to hear people grapple with a question or a problem, and it's actively happening in the tape.
Yeah. And Jenny, for you, is there a story that recently, like, you heard a pitch and you were like, yeah, you should run at that, like something that got you excited?
Well, I think the more common scenario is that there's a great idea that doesn't have that.
Oh.
And so it's sometimes a hard conversation to have with a contributor, someone who's pitching, and saying that person that you found is really fascinating and has a really is really important in the space that they embody, but that's not a story, and that can feel like an uncomfortable conversation because I'm not trying to invalidate the person, but I'm trying to say that them telling their story or you helping them tell their story in this medium is not going to be effective because it's missing a key ingredient.
Is there a way you work with a reporter in that moment to figure out like how that character or something in that world could like pivot into a story? Like, do you have tools for doing that?
I mean, I think as Wendy said, like asking a lot of questions and saying, well, what about this, or what about this scenario, or could we have the conversation in a certain place or focus it in this certain way, or but then sometimes you just kind of have to let it go.
That can be hard for, as the producer, like it can be hard when you love something so much to let it go.
Well, and also like it's hard to let go, but it's even harder to let go after you spent weeks working on it. And so part of my job is to spot it early if I can and say, like, let's stop. So when stories are killed, it's not done with any relish whatsoever. It's painful, but it's often because we feel like it's the best, or I feel like it's best for everyone involved.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes they pop up again a couple years later or something.
Totally.
But somehow I won't let it die. Let's actually just talk a little bit more about like the relationship between a producer, a reporter, and an editor. Like, how do you think? I feel like there's a lot of different versions of that relationship. Is there a way that you, as an editor, work with your producers and reporters?
We're starting with me again?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, I think every single producer is different. And for me, it's really important to understand that producer and how they work and function. So I work on 2 different teams. They work completely differently. They have different levels of like experience, different styles. So for me, like the biggest thing was asking like, how do you work? Like, what works for you? What type of feedback do you need? What type of what is the best way for me to give notes? Do you need me to write with you? Like, what are the steps and where do I fit into your process? I think it's really important to like have that conversation, and particularly for me because I'm newer to this role of like figuring out how I fit in with like this team and this group of people. And I think it's also it's a collaboration. Like, you should feel as an editor, like I feel maybe not quite, maybe sometimes I feel just as much ownership over the story as the person producing or reporting it, which feels weird because like I didn't necessarily go out and do that, but I like have put in like a lot of that work and energy. And so it is a collaboration. It's like, it's both of your babies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very intimate relationship. And for me, like I worked with a lot of people that I've known for years, and it's all about trust, and you have to build trust, and it takes a long time. And actually, when I started working on Caliphate, I worked with Andy Mills, who I didn't know at all, and we had a really hard couple of months because he had a vision of how he wanted the story told, but his vision was really had some major problems, but he just would not let it go. And so my job was to kind of chip away at that vision to get it to a point where it made sense. He wanted to do a story that had no narration. You don't know where you are. You don't know what's happening. We're not going to explain anything. There's just going to be sound, and it was cool. And he wanted it to be like a movie, But I needed to kind of bring him back to reality a little bit so that you didn't alienate the audience, which was, I thought, what was going to happen if you had a completely non-narrated, story. But, and it took us a long time to build that trust, and eventually we got to a really good place. And then once you kind of break through with someone, you can just, it's like magic when it works. It's like you're in like the best relationship you've ever had, and it's just working, and the machine's just turning, and everybody's agreeing. And we would fight a lot too, but it was always very respectful and good, and we always got to a place where like we all felt good. And there were just battles that I lost, and there were battles that he lost, but it was really fun.
One thing that I think you've mentioned to me before is like talking about how an editor can sometimes have distance from a story that the reporter doesn't.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, in that case, Andy was so in it, he just couldn't see it anymore. But on the daily, because it's a much quicker turnaround than I'm used to, I'll work with a producer and we'll get the piece to a certain place, and then I'll actually ask someone else to then look at it, because then I get inside of it too, and then I lose perspective. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Jenny, what about you? What do you think about your role as editor working with reporters?
Yeah, I definitely relate to getting very personally invested in it and needing a fresh set of ears to kind of bring me back to reality too. We were talking about this before, and I think it's because I kind of have a baby on the brain. I'm pregnant, but I think of probably the relationship with a midwife, who, the person who's delivering the baby is there for the baby, the midwife is there for the baby, but we're all kind of taking care of each other, and it's all about the baby. Like everybody's health is also important too, but like we're all doing this in service of the story. And so I guess there's the balancing of what the listener needs, what the producer needs, and what the story needs, that the editor juggles. When I was talking about that metaphor before, it came out much more succinct, but sorry.
Well, and what about, like, I guess I'm curious about, like, involvement in different parts of the process. Like, how involved are you before the reporter, like, even goes out to collect tape? Like, are you letting them go do that on their own, or is that something you're, like, really working through with them?
I like to pregame with reporters before they go out and get tape. I mean, they come with a pitch, but hopefully the pitch has room for my ideas, and also the ideas of the team in the show that it's going to live, to inform it and to amplify it. And so I like to, especially with reporters that don't have quite as much experience, to kind of plan our luck a bit, and have, know that they'll go out and they'll get a lot of great tape, but that plan should still allow space for surprises to happen, and for parts of the story that they didn't even know existed to surface and for them to follow. So I like to be involved as early as possible.
And what about prepping for a serialized thing, Wendy? Like, how is that different?
I mean, I wasn't really a part of that planning.
Okay.
But I think that they were lost in the woods for a long time, and they were kind of just getting tape, and they knew that there was a story, and they knew that they wanted to record Rukmini going to Mosul. And they knew that they had this other story about a guy in a basement in Canada. So that really, the whole thing really came together in the edit. There wasn't a lot of planning, but we had to do a lot of stitching to figure out how to make this one cohesive story. And then obviously it was just, a year in the life of Rukmini Kalamaki. What is that like? It's from a basement to Mosul, and so that's where that, yeah.
And when you did get into the stage of like taking all that tape and trying to make it into a series, like can you sort of bring us into that room even for a minute? Like, was it something that you had mapped on a wall? Did you, like, how do you think about that much story at once?
So we structured we structured so all of the episodes we put it all in Post-its. We did all of the story beats, and we just had this massive whiteboard where we just kept moving things around and moving things around. And until the very end, we were moving things around on the Post-it, but the Post-its were key.
Wow.
And we did a lot of whiteboarding, but yeah, just story points, and we did different colors for different characters. So like if we knew this character is pink and this character is green, and we know that we need this person to come back here, and we want to have an equal distribution. So we did a lot of things like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been cool to see.
Yeah.
Emanuele, what about like when you do all the prep, like, and it doesn't go how you prepared it? Like, how frequently does that happen where you send a reporter out and they come back with something totally different?
Yeah, I mean, that happens, it happens a lot, which is like sometimes great, and you end up with like these wonderful surprises that like enhance your story. And sometimes it's like, crap, we need something to air in like 2 days, so we have to like make this work. So we were for example, on the Nod, we were trying to do this story about Black people in Kung Fu, and we like had the front half of the episode, which was like this interview with like RZA, and then the back half was going to be a more complicated thing, sort of about like the way we talked about it was going to be about like appropriation, and like the role, like how does that sort of relationship between Black people and Asian culture and Kung Fu, like how a larger discussion about like how does that feel and like what's going on here. And the reporter had done a pre-interview, and like the guy had said all this stuff, and it seemed really interesting, and then he went to do the actual interview, and like none of that came out. And so we ended up really like, it had to come out. We had to have an episode basically, because we are a weekly show with a very small staff.
Wait,
and
what did he say instead of the interesting things that he was supposed to say?
He just like talked about himself. And he was kind of interesting. He did like, he was on the staff of The Last Airbender, best TV show ever. He did like all of the martial arts for the show that like the show is based off of, and he's like a Black dude. And like that's not a story in itself, right? The story, you know, was supposed to be this more complicated thing that he was doing this work with, but he just like the second time we interviewed him with the microphone in front of him, like was not doing that work. And so we had to sort of like pull some magic, and ended up making like very kind of similar to the Harry Potter clip that you heard earlier, like trying to make like a stylistic movie thing that like that did a lot of the storytelling work, even though like the story itself maybe wasn't like as strong or didn't necessarily have like that thoughtfulness that we'd initially intended for it to have. Yeah.
Gotcha. I want to switch over to Q&A in just a minute, so maybe I'll just ask my last question, which is, I'm just curious if you could bring us into like, I mean, I guess we heard a little bit of the editorial room for Caliphate, but like, how do you usually run an edit? Like, what level of polish do people bring to you? How long do they last? Just like, what is that room like? How involved are you in like writing? I'm just curious what the process looks like at the end.
It totally varies for me and whatever project I'm working on, and what the producer needs at any given point. Sometimes we'll simply trade notes using Google Doc, and you know that's generally later on in the process when we're like spit polishing stuff, or we'll sit and we'll listen to tape and figure out, is there a there, and then figure out what the structure of the thing will be. I don't think there's not one right way to do it. And group edits also, like I've been in a variety of group edits when sometimes it feels like a free-for-all and sometimes it feels like a real puzzle-solving session together. So it varies.
Mm-hmm.
So at the New York Times, we don't do group edits at all, which is the only way I have ever edited anything. And so now it's, so with Caliphate, Andy would give me a draft, and he puts music in very early, which that's also new. That's something that I always did at the very end. I would edit the text and then we do music at the end. So now we just do Google Docs. I just edit on my own. I listen on my own and put notes in. And I actually prefer it now because the group edit takes up so much time, and there's a lot of dynamics in the room, and sometimes people will say something because they feel like, well, I didn't say anything, so I better say something, and that takes up time, and it's just, I find that it's more efficient just to do my own notes and see other people's notes in there too, and then I can respond to them. We can have little discussions and the little panels on the side. So yeah, do you guys do Google Docs also?
Yeah, so we do a combination of like group edits and sort of like the Google Doc edits, where toward the front end of a process of a story, you're more likely to have a group edit, but once it's more refined, then it gets to the point where we're just like listening and everybody's making a crap ton of comments. And then I will curate the comments, because that's the other thing is like, you want everyone to listen, you want everyone's opinions, but I also don't want your opinions. Some of them I don't want. So that's, yeah. So that's like, it's a little bit of a mix of those two types of edits. And like, yeah, group edits can be like, it can be very chaotic. I think like the most important thing for group edits, or like the thing that I do enjoy, is fresh ears. Like I always try and bring in someone who's like never heard it basically to every single edit. Just to sort of like be a barometer of like, does this make sense? Do you understand what's happening? We understand what's happening. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a mix of both.
Okay, so there are 2 microphones towards the front of the room. If you have questions that you want to ask, if you can come up to one of the microphones, that would be great. And if you have a question for a specific member also of the panel, if you can just say who your question is for, that's great.
It's a standoff.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. So right now, the podcast I produce, I also host, and I have one sound engineer, and that's it. And we don't have an editor, and I hope that one day we do. But do you have any thoughts or tips about self-editing and how to create some of that distance from what is my own work?
Do you have opinionated friends or family members?
Yes, yes, but
I mean, I think time. I think time is the only distance if you are self-editing. Going to bed, sleeping on it, taking a walk, listening to music, get away from it, and then go back and really be honest with yourself about this joke that I put in that I thought was so funny on Tuesday. Is it really funny? Or is it just amusing me, but thinking about the audience, thinking about how people are going to hear it? But I think time, to me, is the only distance that helps.
Yeah, and it can also be helpful if you do have opinionated friends or family, to send it to them and give them a couple of specific questions to answer, like what part of this is unclear, what's your favorite part about it, where do I lose your interest, so that they feel that they're able to give you the kind of feedback that you need, rather than it's great or he sounds annoying, which might be also true.
And also, if you're going back and listening to your work, this is one thing that I always do, is when my mind starts to drift to what I'm having for dinner, that's when I'm like, okay, stop. What's going on here? Wherever my mind drifts, that's like I have to go back, and there's something not working here. There's something that I've lost the thread somehow. So be aware of those moments too. Yeah.
Let's go to you.
I work on a newish weekly podcast on the politics desk at WBEZ, and I'm the host and the main producer. And I'm wondering if you have any tips for people who are up against a clock. Basically, we produce the whole thing on Thursday, and we try to work off of an outline with a few signposts. But we record Friday, and that's what we have to work with. And sometimes I listen back on Monday, and I'm like, why did we do this one section? Any tips for editing when you only have about a day and a half, and how to edit outlines versus scripts, because we don't script everything.
It's been a long time since I worked on a daily show. I mean, I think one thing that would be helpful is like the types of edits that you're making, right? Like thinking like big picture only, like ignoring some of sort of the small stuff. Just because if you're like working within that limited time window, I think the most important thing is like clear ideas getting across. So like sort of like the finer or the smaller edits, like I would save those until the end if you have time, sort of thing. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I had this experience recently where on this Missouri stories that we did for the Daily, where I thought the piece was in good shape, and I shared it with Larissa, who is my co-editor. She listens to things after I did, and she said, "Oh my God, this needs a total restructure." I was like, "Oh my God, total restructure!" And we had basically, it was tomorrow, the next day's show, and so she kind of had this vision, and she went for it, and she started restructuring it. And about 4.5 hours into it, I thought, this was a mistake. This is not the time for restructuring. Basically, if the thing makes sense, and you can't restructure because you just can't, you just don't have the time, just make sure it makes sense, and just make choices, and you just have to commit to them. And when you listen the next day, you might say, I would have done that differently, but you need time and distance, and if you don't have it, you just don't have it. But you have to just commit to like, well, if it's at this time, we can't restructure things. Or if you are getting notes from an editor, these are the notes I'm looking for. There's no restructure. I need notes on, is this point landing? Is this thing landing? And be very clear about what you need, but just like make a decision and go for it. And you can always keep going after your deadline. You can always do it. I mean, with Heavyweight, we worked on that first Buzz and Sheldon story for 1.5 years, and he wanted to keep working on it. It's like, you could keep working on it, or you could just put it out in the world and do the next one. And the nice thing about a daily show is that there's always the next day, and you always have another chance to do another thing, and you just like keep going. So that's my advice.
I think we probably only have time for one more question. Do you want to go?
Hi. So I edit written stories, and obviously we have like a basic formula, right? With like the lead, the nut graph, the context, the conclusion. I'm curious, like as a podcast editor, are you taught a basic, like an analogous basic formula for a story? And I also, if I may, I'm also curious in thinking about innovative story structures, like for Caliphate, for instance, what other kinds of media do you tend to take inspiration from, whether it be like movies or novels or long-form journalism?
I mean, I find inspiration in everything, movies, other podcasts, and there's not really a formula, though I do something that I learned from Ira Glass, which is that start with your best tape. Start with your best tape. Always get people sucked into whatever it is you're going to do. And there's also the E structure, where you start with a scene and then you kind of go back around. Is that backwards? You go back around this way, and you go back and you tell the story. You start with a scene and then you go back in time and you tell the story again. But I don't.
Yeah, there's like lots of different sort of like structures and formulas, right? There's like altered chronology, there's like a diamond shape, there's the E, there's like the gold coin, but like we break those formulas all the time. So it's like there are sort of things out there, but I think like they're not like set in stone types rules in the same way that like you need to have a nut graph at the top of a written story.
What's the gold coin?
Oh, that's like sort of, it's like when like the whole story is told in a sequence of very small surprises.
Oh.
Basically, like you pick up a gold coin and here's another gold coin and I'm leading you to the other gold coin.
Oh.
I might have just made that up.
I
No.
like it. Trademark it. That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you all so much for being up here today. It's so wonderful having you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.